Tonight, for the first time, we are in Elgin. Down the years, the Beatles, Pink Floyd and King Charles have all appeared on stage here. But tonight, there's only one show in town. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland giving you the chance to ask the questions that matter to you. Answering them this evening on our panel, the Principal of Gordonston School and Deputy Lord Lieutenant of Moray, Lisa Kerr. In a previous career, Lisa was a presenter and producer for Radio 4th and Classic FM before becoming the Director for the UK Radio Industry Trade Association. From the Scottish Conservatives, Edward Mountain MSP, he represents the Highlands and Islands and is the convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. Edward spent 12 years in the Army and farms on the River Spey. From the SNP, the MSP from Motherwell and Wishaw, Claire Adamson, convener of the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Culture Committee. Claire has campaigned extensively for more female representation in STEM subjects. Vocal coach and columnist Evie Burnett is with us tonight. Evie is a mezzo-soprano and has performed as a soloist with, amongst others, the Welsh National Opera. In her role as a vocal coach, she's worked with some of the biggest stars in music, including Beyoncé and Lewis Capaldi. And interesting fact, it all started here in this building where Evie appeared as a model. Also with us tonight, Andy Whiteman. Andy's a writer and researcher on land and democracy. He was the Scottish Green MSP for Lothian for 5 years before resigning and sitting as an independent. As well as writing several books on the subject, he runs the Who Owns Scotland website. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience here in Elgin. It's our first time with you tonight. We're delighted to be here, and to you at home for watching. You can join in the discussion wherever you are. BBCDN is the hashtag you need on social media, or give us a follow if you like at BBC Debate Night. And our podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Hebe Hatcliffe. Hebe.
Can the panel suggest how I can get a dental appointment in Moray?
Thank you, Hebe. You can tell from the applause, this is it's an issue right across Scotland, but a particular issue here. We learned today, in fact, that over the last 2 years, 5,000 people in Elgin have lost access to dental care. Hebe, what's been your experience?
I moved up here 3 years ago, and other than one emergency dental appointment when I broke a tooth, I've been unable to get any dental appointments. I was told that I should return to my previous dentist, which would be great, except it was in Dover, 650 miles away.
Wow. Thank you for that. Edward Mountain.
It's a problem I hear across all of the Highlands and Islands. We need more dentists, that's the first thing that we need to do, but we also need to reward the dentists properly for the work that they're doing.
Well, we're offering an incentive of £25,000 here for new dentists, and that doesn't seem to be working.
No, because we're not paying the dentists for the work that they're carrying out when they're actually carrying it out. We are not giving them sufficient reward. And what happens if you join a dentist, you join their list in their dental practice, and most people never change their dentist, but most people don't go to their dentist. So they are retained on that list with the benefits that go to that practice, but when they come to do some treatment for you, they're not paid enough by the government to carry out that treatment. So consequently, private practice, where a lot of these dentists are based and will do national health treatment as well, aren't prepared to take on new patients. And consequently, people aren't getting to the dentist. And it is a real, real problem which we need to address, because dental health actually is getting worse in Scotland. It's been getting worse in Scotland for about 10 years.
That's the reality. Claire Adamson, 83% of dentists say they're pulling back from NHS work in Scotland. What are you and the Scottish Government going to do about that?
Well, I think I'm not part of the Scottish Government, of course, but the Scottish Government is trying to work with dentists to improve the situation. It is a difficult situation, and we know that many have moved into, as we say, private practice. But the government is really constrained in what it can do. The challenges on the public purse are as never before, and that's a combination of inflationary prices, not least of which have come from the disastrous budget from the UK government with trusts. So our health service is under pressure. The inflationary pressures have meant bigger pay deals, and some of those are up for negotiation at the moment, but there's only so much we can do.
But Edward Mountain says this is about dentists not coming into the profession, not enough dentists coming into the profession. You're offering £25,000, your party, Scottish Government, offering £25,000 for dentists to come in, and that's not working. So you're going to have to do something else, aren't you?
Well, it all comes down to having all the powers open to us to recruit people from elsewhere. We know Brexit has meant that a lot of people have left the country. It's more difficult for people to come here and work in our health service. I was speaking to Sudanese members of the health service just last week who are under extreme pressure because some of whom have had to go back to Sudan now can't get back into the UK because they can't get family visas. So our health service has been starved of vital resources because the immigration system and Brexit has caused real difficulty in getting people to come and work in Scotland.
So what's your message to Hebe here tonight, who hasn't seen a dentist in 3 years?
Well, what we'd say to Hebe is it's not an unusual situation. There are challenges not so much in the Central Belt because there are more dentists available. But what we have to do is ensure that the health service is maintained and that we try to bring people on board, and that will take negotiation with the dentists to try and reach a solution for this.
OK, lady in the second row there in the blue. Yeah,
we're talking about, about people being rewarded, like the dentists, and how about the NHS is under a massive amount of pressure and things. Is it the fact that perhaps that NHS services are going to be more privatised?
Well, I certainly wouldn't like to go down that route. I'm absolutely dedicated to the National Health Service and for the service.
The incentives that are going on at the minute aren't working.
The incentives are not working at the moment, but we need to look to every solution for this. So that means.
So what is your backup solution?
Well, as I say, the discussions are there. We have to encourage more people to study dentistry. We have to encourage people to come and stay in Scotland. Again, Brexit makes that more difficult.
That people are leaving Scotland. Why, if Scotland's such a great place to be, then why are people emigrating?
Well, people are emigrating because they're moving with their feet, but there are lots of pressures on the country at the moment. We're in the worst economic situation that we've been in. If you just look across the water to Ireland, its economy is absolutely booming at the moment, and we're set to have the lowest growth rate out of all the G20 countries.
Right, okay. Let's not get away from the question here, which is about dentistry provision throughout Scotland, but in this area particularly. Andy Whiteley.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you get a dentist here in Murray. I mean, I'm quite lucky. I mean, I was without a dentist for a number of years, but I have a dentist in Fort William. I was there just a couple of weeks ago. And what's interesting about politicians talking about free health services, I paid. Now, some people don't pay for dental services, of course, but I paid. And it seems strange that we talk about a national health service free at the point of delivery, but actually dentistry sits there in this kind of strange place where you have to pay. I mean, one of the answers, presumably, is to get more dentists onto the payroll of the NHS rather than operating as private businesses. I mean, dentists are strange. Well, not dentists themselves. My nephew,
you might have watched that dentist in Fort William.
my niece and nephews are dentists, and they went into the profession. They're loving it. They're NHS dentists. They spent 7 years training. It's a tough gig. But the bottom line is dental health, as Edward says, is vitally important. And everyone should be getting regular checkups. It's key preventative health, and it should be on the NHS, and it should be free at the point of delivery, and it should be available right across the country.
Do you think we're seeing privatisation by stealth when it comes to dentistry?
What was the privatisation in dental? I mean, consultants and dentists opted out of the National Health Service in 1945. My grandfather was a dentist. I remember him campaigning against the National Health Service. And they got contracts, and they retain their status today, and not consultants, sorry, doctors, dentists and GPs. They retain their status today as private contractors to the NHS. I think that has to change.
Let's go to the audience. Gentleman over there. Yes.
How long has the SNP been in charge of health services in Scotland? And why is it not getting any better? Why are you still blaming Westminster when it's been how many years? 10, 15 years that you've been in charge?
Well, the SNP works, as all Scottish governments do, to a fixed budget. We don't have any borrowing powers. We have been impacted as much as any individual through the cost of living prices and the way that has affected our budget. So we're doing the best that we can. So, for instance, there is an offer out at the moment to junior doctors. It's the best offer in the UK of 14.5%. that remains with them to see if that's accepted. But that has to come from the health budget.
Okay. Okay.
There's no spare money to be had.
Okay, I want to hear from more people in the room. Lady in the striped top. Yeah, on you go.
Yes, I have to take issue with this. We'll bring them in from the Sudan or Poland or wherever. They need their dentists as well. We should be training more. We closed the Edinburgh Dental School. No wonder we're running out of dentists. OK, we've now got one in Aberdeen, and that will help. But we need to train our own dentists, not pinch them from other countries.
All right. Just briefly.
To be clear, these were people who are already working in our health service and doing a fantastic job, and it was from consultants right down to nurses to people who work in the auxiliary services in our health service. The problem is that some have gone home to rescue relatives there and are now stuck in places like Dubai and in Egypt, and they can't do the job they're contracted to do in our health service because of the restrictive attitude to the visas in this country.
We're still not helping Hebe get her dentist here. So, Lisa Kerr, can you help?
I'm afraid I don't think I can, but I do think that when we're looking at these issues, we need to go right back to the source and think about training. And is it possible for us to release more places in Scottish universities for Scottish students to train as dentists and doctors, because we know that can be a challenge. So I think we need to look at that. But I think also it's not just about the individual battle that someone like you is facing. It's recognising that dental health isn't a trivial thing. Dental health is absolutely key to overall physical health, because good dental health means we can enjoy a healthy diet. But it also is really vital for positive mental health. Absolutely. Because so many people, I've just discovered this quite recently actually, a poor mental health is often associated with poor dentistry. People literally not wanting to leave the house and speak to other people because they're embarrassed about their dental health. So we mustn't see dental health as trivial. This is absolutely essential to a holistic health provision.
OK, lots of hands up in the audience. Lady with the glasses in there. Yes.
Yes. The students go to universities in Scotland, but like in St Andrews, one of the medical schools that they do their training at is Manchester. Once they go to Manchester, we've lost them up here, and I don't know if that's the same for dentists as well. But I know St Andrews has a link to Manchester, and that's where the medical students go. OK, interesting.
Lady on this side here. Yes.
The regulatory body for dentistry is not being mentioned, the GDC. So I understand, just like Ofsted, it's been quite overzealous recently, and that might be a quick intervention point, because dentists have committed suicide whilst being investigated, and it's been an issue for them.
That may be a factor in this as well. And just in the middle there, yes. On you go.
Yeah, I find it quite rich to hear the SNP member talk about not having enough money to go towards the health service or dentistry. Perhaps if we don't spend so much on another divisive independence referendum, we might actually have some money to spend on the things that matter.
All right, and one more. Young lady on the front. Yeah, on you go.
Do you think a factor in this is that people are spending so many years learning how to be a dentist, but at the end of it, in Scotland, the wages aren't as high as they should be, and we're going to other countries? Do you think wages should be obviously raised in order to keep our dentists here?
Evie Burnett, is this part? Are we not paying our dentists enough to get? I mean, £25,000 bonus in this area still isn't doing the job.
Well, that's an interesting fact, because certainly where I live, and I'm very much Scottish, born and bred Methlick, I'm from this area, but I don't live up here. And certainly down where I live, a lot of dental practices, it is about money. They are getting more money from the people who are coming in for cosmetic dentistry. And a lot of them are doing things like Botox and aesthetics and all sorts of strange things. And you can get an appointment for that. But you cannot get an appointment if you need a root canal. So I think that it is a lot about money, and I think you're probably right, and that if dentists are given the choice as to do NHS dentistry or to earn a bit more to do some other things, they're going to do that.
OK. Hebe, I'm afraid we still haven't got you a dentist, but...
Sorry.
We've raised the issue, certainly. Yeah, you've got a really smile anyway. Your views on that, the situation where you are as well, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We've got a lot to get through tonight, so let's go to our second question of the night, which was also very popular with our audience here tonight, and it comes from Nicola Stephen. Nicola.
Thank you. The Scottish Government promised to dual the A96 12 years ago, and no works have begun. When will this dangerous and congested road finally be dualled?
Thank you, Nicola. New figures out today showing road deaths in Scotland at their highest level, in fact, on all roads since 2016. The A96, of course, the main route from Inverness to Aberdeen. Claire Adamson.
Well, I know that this has been challenging for the Scottish Government. The latest round of the procurement process in terms of the A9, it was very difficult to get people to come forward and even compete to do some of this work, and part of that is due to COVID, and part of that is a change in the landscape of who is actually prepared to bid and do some of these types of work.
Sorry, we're still blaming COVID now for problems with the procurement process.
It will come as no surprise to most people that COVID changed many, many things in our economics, in our procurement ability, in the building industry, and that has changed. Now, I'm not from this area, so I don't know the specifics of what's happening with this road, but I do know that the government is progressing and trying to go to re-tender for some of the works, and that the work is carrying on now to try and bring the promises about both the A9 and other road networks to fruition. But certainly, COVID has caused a massive delay in bringing forward these projects that were promised.
So I think it was 12 years ago the commitment was made to dual the A96, and then it was put on pause as part of the Butte House agreement with the Greens. The commitment has now been given to move ahead, but no timescale has been set for this. Andy Whiteman, what do you think should happen?
Well, the first thing is don't believe politicians making promises of building multi-million-pound roads. I mean, I think there's a road north of Aberdeen to Peterhead that's just been dropped now. Alex Salmond promised that in 2007 within 100 days, I think. But, yes, I mean, I think the north of Scotland is generally ignored. I think our connectivity... I don't want to see massive investment in new roads. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to focus on public transport a lot more, and that's an option certainly in the more densely populated parts of Scotland. But in the north, we need these roads, and we will always need those roads. And it'll be interesting to see what the climate impact assessment comes up with, because of course in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, there should be no diesel or petrol cars on the road. There should be electric, hydrogen or whatever. But we still need that connectivity because road transport is critical to the economy of the north of Scotland. So I suppose I despair at the politicians and the promises they make and their failure to deliver them. And I suppose the bottom line for you as voters is to reflect on that in the ballot box.
So, just so I'm clear, you're saying they should be pushing ahead with this, Julie?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen the business case for the A96, right? But I've driven the A96. I mean, I studied in Aberdeen. I've spent a lot of time on the A96. It is a critical trunk road in Scotland, and it's not in the condition it should be, given its vital importance to the North East and the Highlands. So, yes.
OK, lots of hands up in the audience. Lady down here.
I disagree with the fact with COVID, and I also disagree with the fact that there's no construction companies. Construction in this country is booming. So if you got rid of the red tape and got on with it, then we'd have decent roads. We've been ignored for too long in the Highlands and Islands. Look at the ferries. I've travelled up and down that road for 3 months. I've hit potholes. I have juggernaut lorries just about wiping me out as they're trying to overtake each other, and I've got nowhere to go because I'm in a wee Fiesta. It's just not good enough. We need this road now. It's absolutely vital to our economy. It's vital for our public transport. What's the point of having electric buses if they hit potholes and the road is not fit for purpose? And it hasn't been fit for purpose for years. I mean, for goodness sake, there isn't even any service stations anywhere up that road. I've travelled up in the winter, I couldn't find and it was like, take a break. Yeah, I'd love to take a break, but there's, you know, but I was driving for like 100 miles, there's not a coffee shop, nothing to be seen in the pitch black, going through the Cairngorms, absolutely petrified.
Okay, I can imagine.
It's not good enough.
Thank you. Man with the glasses at the back. Yeah.
The big link that here has to be made has to be about improving the public transport network in the north of Scotland as well. As the panel member said earlier, it's an absolute joke that how poor the provision of public transport is across all of rural Scotland. As somebody who's originally from the south side of Glasgow, you know, I've got great experiences of being able to get a train every 15 minutes to more or less wherever I want to go. You come up here, you're lucky to get a train, what, once an hour, 90 minutes, best case scenario, and there's only one line running between Aberdeen and Inverness, so should we be looking alongside dueling things like the A96, putting serious money into improving the infrastructure and public transport across not just Murray, but the whole of rural Scotland?
Thank you. And lady with the glasses. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the aspect of safety is twofold when you also consider that for several years now we have had no maternity service in Elgin. When I was pregnant last year with my twins, I had to face the serious possibility of giving birth by the roadside in the middle of November because I knew that if I got caught behind a tractor in the middle of labour, that would be it. So the safety element is not just the cars, it's also because we severely lack infrastructure, not just in our roads, in public and private transport, but also in hospitals. It's part of a much, much larger problem. But also, the road that's leading between Lossiemouth and Elgin, how many weeks did that take to double that road? Because we have a new housing estate right next to it. It's not that hard.
Thank you. Lisa Kerr.
Yeah, so I've lived in Murray for nearly 20 years and I had the great privilege of all of my 3 children being born at Dr. Gray's Hospital. And that was before the downgrading of the maternity unit there. And it is, the lady in the audience is absolutely right, it is the interrelationship between different pieces of public policy that so severely disadvantage parts of Scotland like Murray. Now, we can be a bit flippant and say, actually, it's quite nice the roads aren't very good because no one gets here and we get to have this beautiful bit of Scotland to ourselves. And on a gorgeous day like today in Murray, who wouldn't want that? But the really serious point is that whether it's in health service or in roads or in public transport, we are often forgotten about. You know, we've got a super new railway station at Inverness Airport, but at Aberdeen Airport, if you want to get the train to Aberdeen, to the airport, you get off at Dice because the train station is on the wrong side of the runway and you have to get a taxi to the airport. You know, we're just not thinking in a joined up way, and when you have a sparsely populated area, you need to be much smarter and think much more long term about the way you plan public services than we've done hitherto.
Lady in the white top. Yeah.
Regarding the public transport, we've got a situation just now in Burghead and Hopeman and the surrounding communities where people are expected to get on a bus from Burghead to go to Elgin, to then change bus to go to Lossie to see a doctor. And so they then have to do the same in the reverse. And this is what's being proposed, the closure of the surgeries in those communities. And, you know, it's just inconvenient, to say the least, that it could take up to 5 hours for somebody to make an appointment and be able to attend. It's just not acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you. Edward Mountain, there's only so much money to spend. Where should it be going? And is the A96, should it be the priority?
Well, I absolutely believe it should be. And I think what's really interesting and what I find really hurtful is that it seemed to be really, really important to upgrade the rail services between Glasgow and Edinburgh to reduce the journey time by 10 minutes. And we were ignored up here. We've been ignored on the A9. We've had absolutely nothing done to it since the promise in 2007. It's a really quite easy bit of road to dual. The compulsory purchase orders are all in place.
But you need a procurement process. You'd be the first one to complain if it wasn't properly gone through.
Absolutely. And this government doesn't have a good record on procurement. Look at the Aberdeen peripheral road. Where did that go? One of the companies went bust. A lot of the subbies didn't get paid because the government didn't make sure the contracts were properly put in place. So there is a way of doing it. This government doesn't have a good record on it. And I'd like to see a lot more work done. And not just on the roads, because we've heard the reasons for health reasons, you know, giving birth, but it's not just that. If you need an interventional radiologist, there isn't one in Inverness, there isn't one in Elgin, you're going to have to go to Aberdeen. So if you're coming from Caithness, you're going to have to use this road as well. So we need the roads upgraded and we need the railway line upgraded, because having a single track between Aberdeen and Inverness is just nonsense. It means we don't have enough trains and we can't use the train, which we should be using if we can. So we're the forgotten place in Scotland.
Where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to come from to do all of that?
Well, I'll tell you, the first part I would have done properly, if you'd procured the ferries, or the SNP government had procured the ferries properly, £97 million. They're going to spend £500 million on these ferries by the time they finally come into service, and that doesn't include the work that they're going to have to do in the harbours to allow the ferries in. You know, this government needs to sit down, work out where they're spending the money, and yes, should we be spending millions of pounds on civil servants to do an independence case? No.
Okay.
I'd like to see it delivering local
All right,
services.
gentlemen, the short sleeves there, yeah.
Can I draw a comparison between a line drawn from Perth up to Aberdeen, down to Campbelltown? South of there, you've got thousands of miles of dual carriageway. North of there, you're lucky if there's 100 miles of dual carriageway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That puts it in perspective for us. Lady in the pink. Yeah. Yes.
When are we going to stop debating it and actually do something? My husband was lucky to be alive. He was in an accident in 2019 on the A96, and it took 6 hours to cut him out of the car. It's dangerous, and somebody needs to make a decision and actually get on with it before more people die. Too many people are dying. You just need to start doing something, because we're talking about it and talking about it. It just needs to change.
Yeah. Thank you. A man on the end with a beard. Yeah.
The projects we're talking about here are massive scopes of work, you know, multi-billion pounds, you know, and this sort of money doesn't grow on trees. You know, you look at the side of the roads when you're driving around Scotland, some of these projects were funded in partnership with the EU. You know, so that money's gone now. You know, is there scope for either the Scottish Government to be able to borrow money to fund them, because they've only got a set budget to work with, or is the UK Government going to make more money available to make some of these things happen? I get red tape needs to go, we need to cut through that and just start making things happen, but there's not an unlimited pot of money to pay for them. They're hugely expensive.
Thank you. Evie Burnett.
Listening to everybody in the room, you know, we're all on the same page, really. And for anybody watching at home who's not from this area, we're talking about the road between two of the biggest cities in Scotland. We're talking about Aberdeen to Inverness. We're not talking about some little road. We're talking about a road where, as you say, people have to go to hospitals, the elderly people have got to go to a lot of appointments. You know, there's so many reasons. And this lady, of course, talking about her husband being in an accident. You know, it's a dangerous road. There's so many reasons it needs to be done. And I think there's this rumour that the Scottish Government seem to concentrate on the Central Belt and forget about all of us up here. And I think if they don't want that rumour to continue, they need to get up and prove that it's wrong.
Man in the white shirt. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point that Edward's raised in terms of the Scottish Government taking us for granted. Has he not forgotten that his party have been in charge for 13 years at Westminster and could have easily picked up the tab as well to try and fix the problems? Are they taking us for granted, just like the Scottish Government?
Edward Mountain?
Absolutely not. The road building and the infrastructure in Scotland is devolved to the Scottish Government. And the Scottish Government have been in power for 17 years. They've made obligations, they've made you promises, they've made us all promises, and they haven't delivered it. And we are reaping the rewards of that, if they are rewards, where our families have to go to Aberdeen for treatment, they have to go to Inverness for treatment. We've heard the story of the Hopeman and Berghead medical practices closing and trying to go to Lossiemouth. All these things are because we haven't invested in the north. And that's the Scottish Government. They're the ones in charge of all of these. And if they want to stop the rot up here, they need to invest in us.
Gentlemen in the short sleeves. There.
The Scottish Government might as well be called the Central Belt Government. There's, as was just said, there's dual carriageways everywhere in the Central Belt. Where are they up here? Between two big population centres, Aberdeen and Inverness to Perth, where are those dual carriageways? They're everywhere down in the Central Belt. We don't have any up in the north after all these years of a Scottish Government.
Claire Adamson, are you picking up a sense of dislocation here between the Central Belt and the audience here in Elgin this evening?
Certainly a sense of frustration in the room, but I have a sense of frustration as well. I mean, HS2 is deemed a national project and we're paying towards that. I would far rather the money that had was actually improving the infrastructure in Scotland. And prior to Brexit, the Scottish Government did have the opportunity to use EU structural funds for infrastructure projects as mentioned in Scotland. Now that's the Levelling Up Fund, which is mainly delivered by the UK Government. So as Edward made representation to Westminster for levelling up money for this area, for the dualling of this road.
Wherever you are in Scotland, your views on all of this, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We're in Elgin tonight. Next week, we're going to be in Perth, and the week after that, we're going to be in Edinburgh. So if you'd like to come along, as people have here tonight, and be part of the audience for the show, just go to the address that's on your screen right now, click on the link, fill in the form. It takes you just a couple of minutes. Come along and have your say. Let's go to the third question of the night, which comes from Mel Robertson. Evening, Mel.
Good evening, panel. My question is regarding farming subsidies. Given that the majority of fruit and veg found in the supermarket is imported from European countries such as your broccoli and apples and leeks from Spain, and there is also this new free trade deal with Australia which will have an influx of cheap imported meat and mutton from Australia, isn't it time that farming subsidies, which take billions from the public purse, were revised, as it's the only profession in the UK that is subsidised?
Well, we're in farming country tonight. We've got farmers in the room this evening who I'm sure have got something to say about that. 1.65 billion went in subsidies in the years 2021 to 22. Andy Whiteman.
That's a big sum of money. I mean, I'm very critical of the way that the European Common Agricultural Policy worked, and I'm quite critical of the way in which the Scottish Government seems to want to continue to align itself with the Common Agricultural Policy, in particular on things like basic payments, where you're just paid for the number of acres you've got. That seems completely daft. I mean, you talked about food in the supermarkets. I try and buy local, and I was delighted, actually, the other day to find Fife-grown asparagus. That's the first time I've found it. And I think government policy should be focused on producing high-quality food for people in Scotland. And it's not. I mean, if you look, Edward says he grows barley for the whisky industry. 60%, I think, of barley grown in Scotland goes to the whisky industry, which I know is important in this part of the world. But why? Why are we giving government subsidies, public money, to farmers to essentially subsidise global multinational alcohol producers? That's completely daft. And I think government's far too in hoc to the agricultural lobby. In fact, the current agricultural bill and the government's policy is being drawn up in partnership with the National Farmers Union. Now, they should be consulted, right? But they're actually doing it together. There's no other group in society that gets that privileged access to government to design schemes to give itself money. I think that's it. We really do need, Parliament needs to scrutinise the future of agricultural support extremely diligently.
More of it now, Andy, is being based around environmental credentials. Do you think that should be pushed further?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we should be paying people to deliver public services. And we should be paying people, for example, to ensure food security. That's incredibly important. We've seen the impact on energy costs, on disruptions caused by things like the war in Ukraine. We need to gain more food security. And in my view, that's the justification, along with environmental payments, for supporting farmers. But it's not a justification just to give them X amount of money because they have so many hectares of land.
Right, who works in farming in the room tonight? At the back. Gentleman at the back, yeah. What do you think?
Farming at the moment is coming under a lot of pressure on many angles. We are being charged with getting to net zero. As a farming business, I carbon audit every single year with a view to getting to net zero. It is not easy and it's not cheap to farm with that in mind. And at the same time, we're trying to produce healthy, nutritious protein to be sold locally to keep people healthy and part of a healthy diet. We are competing with other industries globally who do not have the same levels of animal welfare, of environmental standards that we do. So we're not competing on an even keel. I would love to farm without subsidies, but we need the mechanism and we need the environment in which we can do that. And at the moment, it's just not there. At the moment, we don't know how we are to be farming in 5 years' time, because we do not have government policy that we can follow to know what we're doing.
Thank you. Evie Burnett.
Surely it all boils down to having wonderful local produce that we eat here. You're talking about a trade with Australia. Why on earth do we want to bring produce from Australia? From a green point of view, we don't want that, and also from the freshness of the food. So surely there must be some way. I don't know enough detail about the subsidies and whether there's too much subsidy or not enough. But what I do know is that as growing up in Scotland, we ate local Scottish produce, which was wonderful, and Scottish meat, and surely we can get back to spending the money so that we can grow our own, produce our own.
Edward Mountain, you farm. What did you get in the way of subsidies last year? Can you remember?
No, off the top of my head, I can't remember. But I can absolutely be honest to you and say that without the subsidies, I certainly wouldn't be able to continue farming, because we don't get paid enough money for the output that we have on the farm. So the margin for your barley crop is probably about 5% above what it costs you to produce, is what you get back from the distillers. For me, it's important because I take that barley back and feed it to the cattle. You know, for the cattle that I produce, yes, the market has been better recently, but it has been a struggle. And I think it'll be a struggle in the future. And as the audience member said at the back, what's really important, if we want quality food, we're going to have to pay for quality food, and that comes at a price.
But Mel's question is, why should you be subsidised? Other areas of society are not subsidised.
I'd be delighted not to take subsidies for producing food. I'd be delighted to do that if I was paid properly for the food that I produce. But I would happily take subsidies from the government to do things which were considered in the public good.
Andy Whiteman?
Are you saying you grow barley for the distillers? Are you saying if the government did not subsidise you just for the barley, never mind the other things you're doing, distillers would stop buying barley? They wouldn't. Well, they'd pay the proper price for it.
Well, there's a very big difference, Andy, between myself and most of the distillers. I farm a very small area. Yeah. I'm a very small cog, but I would like to be paid properly for it. And I think the distillers should be paid more, and I've told them that. And I've told them that on numerous occasions. Now, if somebody wants to come to me and say, well, we'd like a footpath, or we'd like some hedges, or we'd like some trees, and we're going to pay for that, I'd be very comfortable to do that. But I would like my food to be produced, the beef, the barley, the carrots, the other bits and pieces we produce on the farm, to be sensibly paid for, and I'd love it to be used locally. And for you all to eat it, because what we produce up here is quality stuff.
Has Brexit made that easier or more difficult?
I don't think Brexit's had a true effect on farming. What's made the difference is, if I can just give you a really clear example, fertiliser. When Russia invaded Ukraine, before they invaded it, I was paying £250 a tonne for fertiliser. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the price for fertiliser went up to £1,100 a tonne. That's the level. Everything went up exponentially higher. Yes, we got paid more, but the price that we got paid did not cover the extra cost.
OK. Man in the blue shirt, here. Yeah.
I think most people take farmers for granted. Nobody realises what goes into producing a pint of milk for them in the morning and a loaf of bread to eat for their breakfast.
Thank you. Man with the glasses, over there, yeah.
I think it's a bit of a cheek to say that Brexit's had no impact on this, given we're hearing constantly about how we're getting cheap meats are coming in from places like Australia, etc., and that's just all part of these wonderful, wonderful trade agreements we've been able to make after leaving the EU. Weren't our farmers better protected when we were part of the single market?
And our farmer's got his hand back up, so I want to hear more from him. On you go.
There's two things. The whisky industry imports a lot of barley from France, so we're already competing with that. It's Scotch whisky in name only. The other thing is, since Brexit's happened, all border controls of product coming into this country have all but stopped. So there is no control on safe meat coming in to this country from abroad. And we are time and time again seeing unsafe, unfit for human consumption food coming into this country. And that's what we're competing against.
Thank you. Claire Adamson, should we still be subsidising our farmers to the extent that we are?
Well, there has to be a balance, I think, here, and food security will be part of that. And we have seen things like the Fife Diet about buying locally and doing things, changing people's behaviour. But Brexit has certainly impacted, and if we just take the situation for seed farmers in Scotland, that's still being held ransom. It hasn't been resolved, even though we now have the Windsor Agreement. So there are issues there. And as Andy said, it's never been perfect. Previously, subsidies that were given, EU money that was given to the UK government for hill farmers in Scotland was not distributed to the hill farmers in Scotland. So we have to have a balance here and we have to move forward. Now, I have 2 farms in my constituency. It's a very urban constituency, but I grew up on the Clyde side where we no longer have a fruit industry there. And that meant that the jam industry went and everything went with that. So I think we have to support our farmers, but we have to look to the future. I attended an RSPB event in the Parliament recently, and that was showing how the intensive farming and changes can change your environment, rewilding, and to just protect our whole, because it's not just about our farming, it's about our whole ecology in Scotland to ensure that tourism is there, to ensure that we have a reasonable legacy to leave to future generations. But it is a difficult situation, and I do believe that farmers are very important. I mean, all of our industries are important. But if I think about my area, it's not about people being able to afford Scottish or New Zealand beef. It's about people being able to afford a tin of beans. And that's the reality of where we are now. The cost of living crisis in an area of deprivation like mine has hit hard completely. And what we've seen, inflationary prices on food has gone up more in the supermarkets. So there has to be questions asked and a rebalancing here about where we put our money and where the subsidies need to go.
Where our food comes from. Man in the white shirt.
If Edward wants the distilleries to pay more for his barley, then why has his Conservative government just voted to put up the whisky taxes?
Sorry, I didn't
Why has your government just voted in the Spring Statement to put up the whisky taxes if you want the whisky companies to pay more for your barley?
Well, I think it's clear. The whisky industry has done quite well with a freeze on tax, and I would have liked to have seen it not go up. But we have to balance the books, and they are making significant amounts of money, and it's right that they contribute to the costs of running this country. And it would be wrong to say they didn't. I mean, if you look at Diageo's bottom line or Pernod Ricard's bottom line from whisky production, they're doing all right. So therefore the tax, although regrettable, I'm afraid is one of the facts of life.
Well, it's 3/4 of the price of a bottle of whisky is now tax, isn't it? And it's the consumers, I guess, that are paying that. Lisa Kerr, what do you think about this? Should we still be subsidising our farmers to the extent that we've always done?
So I think when we're looking at subsidies or tax, whatever or regulation, what we're doing here is fundamentally a market intervention, because we think that the market on its own won't do something, so that we as a state, as a government, have to do something to change behaviours. We're talking about huge amounts of money here, and I think what I would say as a member of the public, as a taxpayer, is I don't know whether the intentions behind those subsidies are being delivered. And if we're investing all of these millions of pounds in something, then we need to have confidence as taxpayers that that money is being well spent. We also need, I think, to improve education about farming and the importance of food security and responsible land management. And supporting our farmers has to be a really important part of that. I mean, just this morning in our school assembly, rather than our usual hymn singing, and I know Eve, you'd be glad that our students are singing every day, we had 2 sheep shearers in, and they sheared sheep live in front of the children. And they taught them not just about the sort of physicality of it, but about the animal welfare benefits of it, but also the fact that it's not economical. You know, farmers don't earn enough from selling the fleece to pay for the sheep shearers. So they're subsidising animal welfare through sheep shearing. That was a real eye-opener for hundreds of children in our school today. And I think we've got to, A, be really sure that we understand the industries that we're subsidising, but also be really clear that we've got accountability structures in place. So when we are spending billions of pounds on something, we know that we're getting the outcomes that we intend.
Your thoughts on all of this? The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our fourth question of the night, which comes from James Heineman. James.
Hiya. Yeah, how do we tackle violence in our schools?
Thank you. We talked about this last week on the programme, but the story's moved on in the last 7 days. The Scottish Government have announced a summit on the subject of violence in schools, and new figures show that in this area alone, school staff have been subject to nearly 4,500 attacks over the course of the past 5 years. Lisa Kerr, as a head teacher, what do you think? How do we tackle violence in our schools?
Well, the first thing I would say is that my heart absolutely goes out to the teachers that have been subjected to violence and to the pupils who have been affected by that. I think the other thing I would say is that my heart goes out to the children who are involved in this. And I think the violence that we're seeing in schools at the moment, from my experience, is merely the tip of an iceberg of real challenges that young people are facing. The other thing I'd say is we've always had violence in schools. I mean,
you were beaten up in school, weren't you?
I was beaten up in school, yes. Yes, I was. And it was a really awful experience, and that was quite a long time ago. So, you know, it's not a new thing, but it is a serious thing. But I think if we just tackle the tip and not the iceberg, then we're not going to really tackle the problems.
So what's changed, Lisa? Is it the pandemic? Has that made a big difference?
Yeah,
to you?
so, I mean, somebody said earlier, you know, why are we blaming COVID? I think we underestimate at our peril the impact that the pandemic had on young people. We spent 2 years telling children that they were a danger to everyone around them, and everyone around them was a danger to them. And we locked them up, and we pushed them online, and we did that at the time of maximum neuroplasticity, the time when their brains were being formed. If we do nothing else as a result of this COVID inquiry, it must be to recognise the huge damage that we did to young people and to promise never, ever to do it again. And we're seeing daily the impact of that.
James, you asked the question, what do you think?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that we're having when I speak to teaching staff is that the numbers are cut of, say, like, additional support needs teachers that are happening. You know, at the moment, Murray Council's having a consultation about admin staff who go above and beyond in helping other areas. If we're not going to invest in the staff and the people and the resources for children with extra needs, then we shouldn't really act surprised that these sort of things are happening in schools.
Thank you. Police busy here in Elgin tonight by the sounds of it. Man in the blue shirt here.
I'm a school senior leader in a comprehensive, and I've never seen anything like it, to be completely honest. And it has been post-pandemic, and it's not just looking at additional support needs. It's actually everyone. We've all been affected by it. Teachers were working throughout the whole pandemic. School pupils were working throughout the whole pandemic. We've came back. The waiting list for CAMS is almost at 3 years. We've got staff who are on burnout. They're shattered. You've got parents who are also having to support their young people during a pandemic who are now frustrated and angry, so they're getting upset at what's kind of going on. And we're reducing all these sources, such as additional support needs, such as, because teachers can't be touched from government funding, but they're reducing the funding from other places. And it's really, really difficult when you have got to think about trauma in foreign practice, you've got to think about mental health for young people, but you've also got to try and let young people deal with the past 3 years. And I know you said, Stephen, like, oh, we're still talking about COVID, but it's had such a huge impact on schools, and I don't think people are really realising that.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, so I think the other thing we need to recognise is this isn't just a schools issue. I think as a society, as human beings, we have all had a really odd reaction to the last few years. I think we're all angrier. I think we're less patient with each other. I think we're less kind. We see our political leaders speaking with such anger towards each other and about key issues. We role model very poorly to young people. I think we need to spend a lot more time thinking about just stopping, slowing down, being kinder, being more understanding. That I really think we need a societal reset and recognise that we've all had a really, really rubbish time, and we need to look after ourselves and each other, and particularly our children.
Young lady in the front, here.
I completely agree. I'm a school student myself, and I see violence firsthand within schools. There's not enough support for teachers, there's not enough support for students. And as well as this, you're in classes with like 30-odd people, and not everyone can receive support, and this results in violence within schools. And I feel like you have to get to the root of the problem in order to make real change.
What have you personally seen happening?
The other day I went into school, and one of my teachers, I was actually talking with him, and he was helping a student after being pushed down the stairs by other students. And I was even seeing people with scratches, like one boy had scratches on his face. And it's just the fact that kids can do this to other kids and feel no remorse for it. That's what's so concerning.
No remorse. Young man at the back. Yeah.
I also share similar experiences. I've just recently left school, and I actually have seen firsthand, you know, fellow students, but also members of staff actually being threatened. And I just want to commend their bravery for keeping on going. But what I take issue is a lot of the violence which goes on is impacting those in deprived areas the most. The social divides are still clear. And especially after COVID and the lack of, you know, social experiences these young people had, behaviour has gotten much worse. And unfortunately, it is impacting those in the most deprived areas. It has a massive influence on attainment, and this is an issue we have to tackle, or it's going to get worse and we're going to have an even greater problem on our hands.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Evie Burnett, what are we going to do about this?
I think by listening to everybody, we're talking about a crisis here. We're not talking about just a little problem. You know, the gentleman that was talking about in his school, you know, where everybody is really, really struggling. And I think that is not just a case of the odd school here and there. I think there are so many cases of this. My daughter works in a school where children have been excluded. So they're then at her school. So they really are children who struggle in many, many ways. And she really gets to love these kids because she sees in so many cases that they have got no home life, they have got nothing. And, you know, they come into school because they can have breakfast. They come into school because they've got grown-ups who actually care about them. And my daughter will befriend a lot of them. It's quite normal for her to be taking them to hospital because they've been beaten up by another one. And it's been normalised a lot. They film each other so that then, oh, that was great, let's do that. It was being online, and so they've got a kind of notoriety from doing it. So really a lot has to be fixed. And certainly the pandemic has added to this, because it's made things very, very hard for people to come back from that. And also the cost of living crisis, perhaps there's a lot of mental health issues at home, but there's schools in this area and everywhere in the country where we do need special help. And I think that in general, perhaps in your school, because it's a school that maybe doesn't need as much help, but there might be a school in a deprived area that needs a lot more, and we need to look into which schools will benefit from something.
Andy Whiteman.
Well, as Lisa said, this is an issue that's always been with us. I mean, I remember being beaten up at school as well. But it does seem to be a much more serious problem now. And some of the stories that have come out over the past few days are literally horrifying. I mean, I would make 2 points, really. I'm not an expert in young people or education. But one is we really need to understand why this is happening. And I mean properly understand. And that means speaking to everyone who's involved in this and listen properly. And the second is, I think, to put children and young people at the centre of the solution, because often they get ignored. They're seen as the subjects or the objects of various things. And I don't know a young person who believes that hitting and being violent against other people is right, okay? I mean, they're being brought up to understand that that's not right. So why don't we put young people and children at the heart of solving this, because peer pressure is a very, very powerful tool. Now, I don't know what's being done in schools about that, but I do know that far too often young people and children are left out of decision-making, and that breeds a bit of resentment.
Thanks, Andy. Edward, it's the Conservatives that have called for this summit in schools. Is that a good idea, to put children at the middle of it, the conversation?
Absolutely, and you know, it was discussed in the Parliament this afternoon on the back of a motion that the Conservative Party brought forward, and I'm delighted that the SNPs actually rode in behind that motion, and all credit to them, and credit to Jenny Gilruth for saying that she'll hold a summit. But this problem is really widespread. Last figures I saw, there were 19,517 teachers being assaulted, either verbally or physically in school. That's just not acceptable. But it's not just teachers in school, it's the bus drivers as well. It's the people that are coping with children in the local area, because some of these assaults happen off school. I heard stories, harrowing stories today, of 2 girls lying in a pool of blood who'd been assaulted. I have seen a video which was sent to me from a local school of the most horrific fight, which I was actually horrified, despite having spent 12 years in the army, watching happen. It was unpleasant, and it's really difficult to deal with it. So we need to grasp the problem. We need to work across all the parties, and I'm glad the SNP are going to work openly with all the parties on this, because the pandemic has a lot to answer for. And if we don't deal with this now and address it and make children part of the solution, then it's never going to go away.
Claire Adamson, social media, phones in schools are part of this, aren't they?
Well, social media is a problem for all sorts of areas of life, but we do have to remember at the heart of this is children, and it has to be about the children and young people, because we don't want to go down you know, the road of an incident, you know, determining a young person's life for all the reasons we've just talked about the impact that COVID has had on them. I think you talked about a societal reset. It needs a societal response. And that is why the summit is a good idea with COSLA, bringing together the local authorities, bringing together the teachers, but it also needs to involve young people, parents, carers, and to bring everyone together to discuss this issue. Now, I have seen some wonderful work in my local schools. We have gold award-winning rights respecting schools, and I think there is great work being done out there, and we can't minimise that. But I also think the third sector may have a place to say. CAMS isn't always the right place for a young person to go to, so we have to look to other third sector organisations that are offering emotional help in schools, and we will get there.
We will discuss this again, I'm sure. So many hands up on this, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Our hour is up. That's it for tonight. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well from all of us in Debate Night. Good night.